England, the mid-15th century, a kingdom scarred by war, ambition, and betrayal. The Plantagenet line, once the most powerful dynasty in Christendom, now turns upon itself. The red rose of Lancaster, the white rose of York, two symbols, two houses, one crown, and amid the carnage and shifting loyalties, there would emerge a woman, born not to rule, yet destined to alter the fate of kings. Her name was Elizabeth Woodville. History would call her the White Queen. Long before Elizabeth's beauty captivated a king, England itself was bleeding from within. Decades of weak rule had fractured the realm. Henry VI, pious, fragile, and ill-suited to the throne, had inherited the legacy of his mighty father, Henry V, but not his strength. The victories of Agincourt had long turned to ashes. The French wars were lost, the coffers drained, and the people, weary of chaos, began to whisper of change. In the courts of London and the castles of the shires, noble families chose sides, some for Lancaster, the line of Henry VI, others for York, led by Richard, Duke of York, a man of royal blood and colder purpose. For years, England trembled on the edge of civil war, and when the first sword was drawn at St. Albans in 1455, the kingdom erupted. Brother turned against brother, father against son. Fields that once grew wheat now drank blood. This was no foreign invasion. This was England destroying itself. And in the quiet countryside of Northamptonshire, far from the royal courts, a child was born into the Woodville family. Elizabeth, daughter of Sir Richard Woodville and Jacquetta of Luxembourg. Her father, a man of modest birth who rose through courage and charm. Her mother, a woman of noble blood, once married to the Duke of Bedford, uncle to King Henry VI himself. Their marriage had scandalized the English court, a knight of humble origin and a duchess of royal blood. But it was a love match, rare and defiant. In that union, the young Elizabeth inherited both grace and audacity, a quiet strength that would one day challenge the might of kingdoms. Elizabeth's childhood was shaped by contradiction. Born into privilege, yet always conscious of how easily favor could fade. Her mother's tales of courtly life mixed with her father's soldier's wisdom. From Jacquetta, she learned the art of influence, how a smile could be a weapon sharper than any sword. From Richard, she learned resilience, how loyalty, once broken, could cost a man his life. Outside, the country burned. Battles raged. Blore Heath, Northampton, Wakefield. The Duke of York fell, his severed head crowned mockingly with paper thorns. But his cause did not die with him. His son, Edward, tall, golden-haired, and charismatic, seized his father's banner. At Towton, the snow turned crimson. Thousands died in a single day, and the White Rose triumphed. Edward of York became King Edward IV. The House of York ruled England. But peace was fragile. Every victory bred resentment. The nobility who had fought for Edward demanded reward. Those who had backed Lancaster plotted in the shadows, and among the people hope mixed with exhaustion. For every coronation seemed only the prelude to another war. It was into this uncertain peace that Elizabeth stepped into womanhood. Tall, fair, with eyes said to catch the light like silver. Her beauty became legend even before her story began. But beauty alone would not define her. The world she entered was ruled by men of ambition, by generals, lords, and schemers. Yet she would prove that a woman, too, could wield power in her own way. By her early 20s, Elizabeth's life had already been shaped by loss. She had married Sir John Grey of Groby, a loyal Lancastrian knight, and bore him 2 sons. But war spared no family. John Grey fell at the Second Battle of St. Albans, fighting for the losing side. Elizabeth, still young, was left a widow, her husband dead, her lands seized, her sons unprotected. In another time, her story might have ended there, another noblewoman reduced to silence by circumstance. But Elizabeth Woodville was not born to fade quietly into history. Legend tells of a meeting, by a roadside beneath a great oak tree, somewhere near stony Stratford. A widowed lady, dressed in mourning, stood waiting with her two sons, and as the royal procession passed, she knelt before the king, the victorious Edward IV. Some say it was pity that stayed his hand. Others say it was love at first sight. Whatever the truth, that moment changed England forever. Edward, bold and impulsive, could have chosen any bride among the princesses of Europe, but he would choose instead a commoner, a widow of his enemy's house, and through her, the fate of the realm would twist again. But that is another story. For now we stand at the threshold of a new age. The House of York reigns, but its foundations are fragile. Old grudges simmer beneath the crown. The Kingmaker plots in silence, and in the countryside, the widow Elizabeth Woodville waits, her beauty destined to undo kings, her name to echo through history. Before she was queen, she was only a woman, bound by loss, by duty, by hope. But destiny had marked her. And soon, the white rose would entwine with the thorn. Spring, 1464. England is weary, bruised, bloodied, and unhealed. For nearly a decade, the realm has known little but civil war. The red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York have torn the kingdom in two. Villages once known for prayer and harvest now lie abandoned, their fields scarred by hoofprints and fire. Roads once safe for pilgrims and merchants now echo with the march of soldiers. The crown has changed heads more than once in a single lifetime. Faith, loyalty, and law, all are bent beneath the weight of ambition. Though King Edward IV now reigns, young, tall, radiant as the dawn, the land beneath him still trembles. The wounds of Towton, that field of snow and blood, have not yet healed. Tens of thousands lie buried beneath the English earth, each grave a whisper of revenge waiting to rise. And far from the glittering courts of London, far from banners and politics, in the quiet shire of Northamptonshire, a widow walks alone. Her name, Elizabeth Woodville. She is 27 years old, the daughter of Sir Richard Woodville, a knight of modest birth, and Jacquetta of Luxembourg, once Duchess of Bedford, kin to kings and emperors. Through her mother, Elizabeth carries the faint shimmer of foreign nobility. Through her father, the humble honor of English soil. Their marriage had been scandalous in its time, a duchess wedded to her servant, a love match in a world ruled by politics. From that forbidden union came a brood of children, fair, proud, ambitious, the Woodvilles, and from among them one daughter would rise higher than any dared imagine. But in 1464, Elizabeth was not a queen. She was a widow. Her husband, Sir John Grey of Groby, had fought and died for Lancaster, slain at the Second Battle of St. Albans. He had been loyal to the Red Rose, loyal to the doomed King Henry VI. In death, he left Elizabeth with two sons, Thomas, a child of 6, and Richard, still barely walking. Their father's lands were forfeit, their titles stripped. In the eyes of Yorkist law, they were the children of a traitor. And so Elizabeth, noble by birth and yet powerless by circumstance, found herself forced to live quietly on the edges of her family's estate. Her beauty, famed even then, was her only protection in a world ruled by men. Her intelligence, sharp and observant, became her only weapon. Her dignity, unbroken, became her shield. Each morning she walked the fields near the river Nene. Mist clung to the meadows. The dew soaked the hem of her gown. The crows wheeled overhead, black against a pale sky. Sometimes she would stop by the old oak, a great tree standing solitary beside the road to stony Stratford. There she would kneel and pray, not for power, not for riches, only for justice, that her sons might inherit what was theirs, that her husband's name might not be forgotten. Her mother, Jacquetta, would watch from the doorway of Grafton Manor. She knew the world of courts and crowns. She had seen the rise and fall of men who thought themselves immortal, and she knew, though she never said it, that her daughter's fate was not meant to end in silence. Jacquetta's lineage carried old tales of Melusine, the water spirit said to bless her bloodline with beauty and power. Some whispered that the women of Luxembourg could charm destiny itself. And though such stories were superstition, Elizabeth's life would give them strange weight. Her beauty was not the fragile kind that fades in candlelight. It was fierce, commanding, almost fateful. Even among her kin, it drew eyes. Even among enemies, it commanded respect. Yet for all her grace, Elizabeth was no idle dreamer. She managed her household, comforted her children, and endured the quiet cruelty of being forgotten. Her late husband's allegiance had left her shunned by many, pitied by some, and used by others. But she endured, calm, patient, waiting for the turn of fortune's wheel, and that wheel was turning. The year was restless. Rebellions flickered across the north. Warwick's men sought to crush resistance, yet discontent smoldered. Every noble watched the new king closely. This Edward, handsome and victorious, but impulsive, given to pleasure, quick to anger, and swayed by the heart more than the head. He hunted often near Northampton. It was said he found peace there, away from the plotting courtiers. And so fate, with the precision of myth, guided his path through the very woods that bordered the estate of Elizabeth Woodville. It was a mild morning when Elizabeth rose early. The sky was pale with the promise of rain. She had dressed simply in a gown of gray and white and took her sons by the hand. In her grasp, a small folded petition, a plea for mercy, a request for the return of her late husband's lands. Her family warned her it was folly. A widow should not approach a king. But Elizabeth had nothing left to lose, and perhaps something greater than hope compelled her. As she neared the great oak by the roadside, the sound of horns carried across the fields. Dogs barked. Laughter echoed through the trees. The royal hunt was approaching. She knelt, heart pounding, her sons clutching her gown. And through the mist came Edward, tall upon a white horse, cloak of deep blue lined with ermine, his golden hair shining beneath the weak sun, the King of England, conqueror of Towton, lord of half the realm. Elizabeth rose only halfway, bowing low, and presented her petition. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. She spoke not as a subject, but as a mother. She did not plead for herself. She begged only that her children might inherit their father's rightful estate. Her words, simple and sincere, struck Edward more deeply than flattery ever could. He dismounted. He looked upon her, not as a supplicant, but as a revelation. The air seemed to still around them. For an instant, the war, the crown, The burdens of kingship, all faded, and what remained was something eternal. Recognition, soft wind through the leaves. Later chroniclers would call it love at first sight, others infatuation. But even the most cynical agreed. The king was moved in a way no court intrigue could explain. That night, Edward spoke of her to his companions. They laughed. A king in love with a widow of the losing side. Impossible. But Edward's heart was already decided. And for Elizabeth, the meeting beneath the oak marked the first flicker of a destiny she could never have foreseen. She returned home in silence, the petition clutched in her hand, unanswered, but no longer the point. In her soul, a strange stillness had taken root. Not joy, not fear, but the sense that something vast and unstoppable had begun to move. So it was that the widow of Groby, poor in wealth but rich in courage, caught the gaze of a king. And though she could not know it then, that meeting beneath the oak would alter the fate of England. From that day, the whispers began, of beauty too perfect to be mortal, of sorcery passed through the blood of Luxembourg, of a woman who ensnared a monarch not with spells, but with the quiet power of dignity. In the story of the Wars of the Roses, men would wield swords, and crowns would change hands. But it was a woman's voice, soft yet unwavering, that would soon shape the destiny of both Rose and Thorn. The tale begins in the hush before dawn, when the earth still holds its breath and light lies tender across the fields of Northamptonshire. A faint mist drifts through the meadows near stony Stratford, and the oak, vast, ancient, and knotted with centuries, stands sentinel upon a small rise. Its roots plunge deep into the English soil, its branches stretch toward heaven like arms in eternal prayer. It has watched kingdoms rise and fall, armies thunder past, and noble blood stain the grass beneath its shade. But on this morning, it will witness something far quieter and far more dangerous. Not the clash of blades, but the meeting of eyes. Not the roar of war, but the first tremor of love that will alter the fate of England. Elizabeth Woodville stands at the edge of the road, her sons beside her, her cloak drawn close against the morning chill. Thomas and Richard, too young to know the weight of loss, cling to her hands, their small faces pale in the mist. Behind her, the manor of Grafton lies quiet. The fires have long gone cold, the hearth a hollow echo of happier days. Her husband's armor hangs unused, rust spreading across the metal like a creeping shadow. The fields around her are heavy with dew, the same fields that once fed her family, now seized by Yorkist lords in the aftermath of battle. A widow in the age of warriors, a woman alone in a world ruled by men. Yet in her bearing, there is no submission, only resolve, steady, unyielding, and luminous as the pale morning light. She holds a parchment, her petition for justice. It is not the first she has written, but perhaps it will be the last. Today, she will place her plea directly in the hands of the man who holds the kingdom itself. The sound reaches her long before the riders appear. The thunder of hooves, the bark of hounds, the metallic rhythm of harness and chain. The royal hunt moves through the forest like a living tide. Edward IV, newly crowned, victorious, radiant with the vigor of youth, leads the charge. He rides not as a king weighed by governance, but as a conqueror still tasting the sweetness of triumph. Sunlight flashes upon his golden hair, upon the white lion of March emblazoned on his surcoat. He laughs, a sound bright and careless, the laughter of a man who believes the world his birthright. Behind him ride his companions, noblemen, huntsmen, knights, and squires, all reveling in the wild pulse of morning freedom. And yet, amid that careless nobility, destiny waits unseen upon the roadside, a widow dressed in mourning, her sons at her feet, and a single parchment trembling in her hands. As the cavalcade nears, Elizabeth steps forward. Her heart drums steady, but her face remains calm, composed, resolute, fearless. She kneels upon the earth before the great oak, bowing her head as the king's horse draws near. Her sons, bewildered but obedient, drop beside her, their small hands clutching her skirts. The king reins in his horse, puzzled, perhaps annoyed at first. Who is this woman daring to halt the royal hunt? But then he sees her face. The morning light spills across her hair, a shimmering blend of silver and gold, untouched by vanity. Her features, not the flawless mask of a court beauty, but something purer, carved from sorrow and endurance. Eyes of pale gray, deep as rain clouds, meet his. In that instant, the world stills, the forest holds its breath. Even the birds fall silent, as if nature itself pauses to watch. Subtle heartbeat beneath the score. And in that silence, the widow and the king recognize something in each other. A spark neither expects, yet both feel. A strange reverence. A quiet, dangerous knowing. She speaks first, her voice steady, low, musical, carrying both grief and grace. She begs no favor, offers no flattery. Her words are simple, her tone honest. She asks only that her son's inheritance, the lands lost through her late husband's loyalty to Lancaster, be restored. Not for herself, but for them. Edward listens. Perhaps at first out of curiosity, but then with growing fascination. No woman has ever spoken to him this way, not trembling before power, not weaving words to charm, but speaking truth as though he were simply a man, not a monarch. Her courage disarms him more than her beauty. Her dignity humbles him more than her words. For the first time since his coronation, the young king feels something deeper than triumph. He feels the pull of conscience, of tenderness, of awe. Edward dismounts. The clatter of his armor breaks the still air. He removes his glove and kneels beside her. He takes her hand, not as a ruler to a subject, but as one soul to another. Her fingers, chilled by morning air, tremble only slightly in his grasp. He lifts her from the ground, and for the first time she stands eye to eye with the King of England. The oak's branches bend above them like a cathedral roof. Light filters through the canopy in shifting gold, falling across their faces, as though heaven itself acknowledges the moment. He promises to consider her plea. But even as he speaks, something deeper stirs within him, an emotion unfamiliar, profound, unsettling. Desire born not of conquest, but of reverence. Respect entwined with longing. It is said he could not look away from her, that her gaze held him as surely as any spell cast by his ancestors' priests. And perhaps, in some unseen way, the blood of Melusine, that ancient whisper of enchantment from Jacquetta's line, reached out to touch the heart of the Yorkist king. The moment passes. The hunt resumes. But the king does not laugh as before. He rides on, silent, his mind far from the sport. Behind him, his companions chatter and jest, unaware that history has just shifted its course beneath the shade of a single oak. Elizabeth stands watching until the royal party disappears into the trees. Her sons tug at her gown, asking what the king said, but she does not answer. For she knows instinctively that this was no ordinary meeting. The air still hums with it, that strange electricity of fate. When she returns to Grafton, she carries not only her petition, but something weightless and invisible, the gaze of a king burned into her heart, And somewhere, deep within Edward's own chest, the echo of her voice lingers like a prayer he cannot silence. In time, the oak itself would become a symbol. Villagers would point to it and whisper, "There, that is where the king met the widow." They would say that the air around it still carries the ghost of that morning light, that no bird will rest upon its branches at dusk, as if in reverence to what was begun beneath its shade. From that meeting grew one of the most fateful unions in English history, a love that would divide kingdoms, topple alliances, and alter the very fabric of the Wars of the Roses. But in this moment, all was still simple. A woman's plea, a king's compassion, a pause in time. A single encounter, pure and unknowing, that would ripple through generations. The oak stands still today, or what remains of it, old roots beneath English soil, whispering its memory to the wind. And if you listen closely, you may still hear the echo of her voice, soft, steadfast, and eternal. The voice of the woman who would become the White Queen. Love and destiny often meet not in palaces or battlefields, but in quiet places where courage takes its first breath. Beneath an English oak, a widow's faith met a king's heart, and the crown itself began to tremble. In the days that followed their fateful meeting beneath the oak, England seemed to hold its breath. Edward, the young King of York, newly crowned and blazing with victory, found his mind no longer on war or governance, but on the woman from Grafton, the widow with the calm eyes and the unshakable dignity. He had faced armies on muddy fields, outwitted the mightiest lords of England, and forced the Red Rose of Lancaster into retreat. Yet before Elizabeth Woodville, all his conquests fell silent. They began to write. Not letters of state or command, but private notes, carried by trusted hands through the shadowed lanes between the royal court and her modest home. Each letter was sealed not with a king's signet, but with a simple wax rose, white for her, red for him. The words were tender, uncertain, almost youthful in their passion. Edward's scribes and courtiers noticed his distracted gaze, his sudden absences from council. He spoke of hunting in Northamptonshire, yet his quarry was no stag, no boar, but the heart of a woman. Through storm and sunlight he rode, cloaked in secrecy, under the guise of royal leisure. His guards waited beyond the village while the king dismounted and walked alone, his boots sinking into the soft mud of Grafton Fields. He would find her by the old oak or within her hall, the candles burning low, her children asleep. There, by the hearth's fading glow, their voices met in quiet defiance of the world. Elizabeth received him with grace, but without surrender. She was no court maiden dazzled by a crown. She had known war, widowhood, and the struggle to keep her children safe in a world ruled by men's ambitions. Her beauty, famed across shire and court alike, was matched only by her composure. Edward offered gifts, jewels, silks, and promises of favor. She refused them all. "I am my father's daughter," she said, "and my late husband's widow. I will not dishonor either for fleeting comfort." Her voice, calm but resolute, struck deeper than flattery. To a king accustomed to obedience, her refusal was a revelation. He laughed at first, a youthful, impulsive laugh, but when her eyes held steady, his smile faded into silence. In that moment, the young monarch saw not just beauty, but conviction, a mirror of the strength he himself longed to possess. Theirs became a courtship of quiet tension, a dance between desire and principle. He sent verses, copied from the troubadours of France. She replied with lines of scripture and wit, her words edged with caution. They met again in the woods near Grafton, where the dawn broke silver through the trees. There was laughter there, hesitant, honest, human. He spoke of dreams, of a peaceable kingdom, of unity, of a reign built not by fear but affection. And she, who had seen England torn by ambition, reminded him softly, "Even love must answer to conscience." In the eyes of England, their love was impossible. No king could wed a widow of ordinary birth, the daughter of a mere knight, let alone one whose family had once fought for Lancaster. It would insult the nobility, unravel alliances, and plunge the realm back into discord. Edward's advisers warned him sternly, "Marry a princess of France or Burgundy. Bind your reign with gold and blood." But Edward, young, headstrong, and drunk on victory, dismissed their counsel. He had seen in Elizabeth a nobility untouched by title. He had watched her stand unflinching before him, unafraid of the crown that so many coveted. And perhaps, in that defiance, he saw the one person in all of England who loved not the king, but the man. The spring of 1464 ripened into summer. In the warm hush of early mornings, they met in hidden chambers and shadowed glades. She spoke of her sons, Thomas and Richard, of their uncertain future, of lands unjustly seized after her husband's death. Edward listened, not as monarch, but as penitent. He promised restitution, yet her answer was firm. "I seek not gold, nor lands, nor titles, only that my sons be restored their birthright, and that you treat me with honor." It was a challenge unlike any battle he had fought. Where others yielded, Elizabeth demanded truth. Where others flattered, she spoke plainly. And so, before her, the conqueror of Towton bent his pride. Weeks turned into months. Rumors began to stir. Villagers whispered of the king's rides through Grafton. Courtiers exchanged knowing smiles. But none knew the truth, that in a modest chamber lit by one candle, England's destiny was changing. There, in secrecy, a promise was made. Not the fleeting oath of lust, but the solemn vow of a man transformed by love. Edward took her hand and swore before God and heaven that she would be his lawful wife, his queen. No courtiers, no witnesses, no grand procession. Only the sound of rain on the roof and the trembling breath of a woman who had dared to dream. Elizabeth, caught between faith and disbelief, bowed her head and whispered a single word: "Yes." And thus, in secret, the most unlikely union in English history began. A king of York, barely past his youth, and a widowed mother, scorned by the highborn, bound not by politics, but by conviction. They had defied the world, and soon the world would answer. For their love, though sanctified in secrecy, would set the realm ablaze and crown Elizabeth Woodville as England's White Queen. It was the morning of May 1st, 1464, the day when destiny met defiance. The world beyond Grafton stirred beneath veils of silver mist. Birdsong drifted between the hedgerows, mingling with the faint toll of a church bell far across the fields. Within the modest manor of the Woodvilles, preparations began not for a royal feast, but for a secret that would change a kingdom. A small fire burned in the hearth. The scent of beeswax and rainwater mingled in the air. Elizabeth knelt before her mother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, the woman who had once walked among queens and duchesses of Europe. Jacquetta's face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. She knew what it meant for her daughter to love a king, the danger, the envy, the peril that always followed royal favor. Yet she also knew that Elizabeth's love was not born of ambition, but of truth. Jacquetta's voice, soft, imagined. "If he swears before God, child, then you are bound before heaven itself." Elizabeth nodded, her breath trembling. Outside, the road to Grafton lay slick with spring rain. King Edward IV, tall, golden-haired, his cloak heavy with damp, rode with only a handful of loyal men. No trumpets, no banners, only secrecy, only purpose. He had conquered at Towton, shattered the armies of Lancaster, and seized a crown by his own sword. But on this day, the warrior king came not for conquest, but for love. He dismounted before the Woodville gate, his boots sinking into wet earth. Rain beaded on his hair, his eyes searched the doorway. And there she stood, Elizabeth, the widow who had defied him once beneath an oak, the woman who had refused to become his mistress, and in doing so, had captured his heart completely. Their gaze met, and in that silence, all crowns and battles fell away. There remained only two souls, equal before God. Within the manor's small oratory, candles flickered along the stone walls. The priest, a family chaplain bound to secrecy, prepared the sacred vessels. Rain whispered against the window panes, a rhythm older than kings. Elizabeth entered first, veiled in white linen, not the jewels of court, not the silks of nobility, only simplicity, humility, and the steady light of conviction. Edward followed, removing his sword and crown, kneeling beside her. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then the vows began, priest, softly. "Wilt thou, Edward, take this woman?" The king's voice, low and clear, broke the air. "I will." He placed a ring upon her hand, a plain gold band forged not by wealth, but by will. Their fingers intertwined, and with them, two worlds that were never meant to touch. In that brief exchange, history shifted. The widow's daughter from Grafton had become the Queen of England. Only a handful stood witness. Jacquetta, the priest, and two servants sworn to silence. Each knew the cost of such secrecy. Each understood that a crown had just been reshaped in shadows. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, as if the world itself sensed what had been done. A marriage without pageantry, without heraldry, without blessing of council or church. And yet, in its simplicity, it was more sacred than any coronation. When the vows were sealed, Edward touched her cheek. "No priest, nor peer, nor parliament shall break this bond." He left before dawn, his cloak vanishing into the mist. Elizabeth watched from the doorway, her heart a storm of wonder and dread. For though she was now a queen, she could tell no one. When Edward returned to London, the court rejoiced at his victories. Lords gathered, foreign ambassadors bowed, and whispers of new alliances filled the air. They spoke of marriages with Burgundy, with France, treaties sealed by royal brides. But the king smiled and said nothing. He carried a secret heavier than any crown. His advisors believed him still unwed. His enemies plotted for the match that never would be. And somewhere in Grafton, Elizabeth waited, her heart torn between love and fear, her life changed forever by a promise spoken in the rain. Days turned to weeks. The secret of the marriage spread like smoke, thin, elusive, but impossible to contain. A servant whispered to a clerk. A letter passed through trembling hands, and soon the nobility began to murmur. The king has married in secret. A widow, a commoner. Outrage grew in corridors of stone and power, for the mighty men of England had spent years fighting for the throne, only to find it bound in silence to a woman of no royal blood. But none could undo what was done. Before God and witness, Elizabeth was queen. And though her crown was hidden, its weight had already begun to shape the fate of England itself. In that small chapel at Grafton, History was rewritten not with sword or ink, but with faith, courage, and love. The White Rose and the White Queen were joined, and though the world would rise against them, the echo of that rain-soaked morning would endure across centuries. The oath beneath the candlelight became legend, the union that defied the world, the love that would birth both triumph and tragedy. When the king's secret was at last revealed, silence fell across the realm like a blade. Not the gentle quiet of peace, but the breathless stillness before thunder strikes. In Westminster, word spread first in whispers, a rumor too bold to believe. The King of England, Victor of Towton, heir to York's White Rose, had married in secret. Not a princess of France, nor a noblewoman of ancient blood, but a widow from Northamptonshire, Elizabeth Woodville. Courtiers froze mid-step, letters were dropped, pens halted in disbelief. Then the silence cracked, and outrage thundered through England's halls of power. Foremost among the furious was Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the man they called the Kingmaker. It was he who had raised Edward to his throne, guided his armies, and crushed Lancaster's cause. He had envisioned a new England, united through diplomacy and war alike. Now he saw his life's work undone by what he called a foolish passion. In France, Warwick had been arranging a match. Bona of Savoy, sister to the Queen of France, a union to bind the Yorkist crown to the Valois throne, a bond of kingdoms, a peace across the Channel. Instead, his king had chosen love over policy. "A marriage made in folly," Warwick spat before his council, his voice echoing across the chamber. "And England shall pay the price." That day marked the first fracture between king and kingmaker, a crack that would widen until the very realm split with it. When Edward presented his bride at court, the reaction was not celebration, but disbelief. Lords and ladies bowed out of duty, yet behind their smiles burned scorn and envy. "How," they whispered, "can the daughter of a mere knight sit upon England's throne?" The Queen's beauty none could deny, but her bloodline was deemed unworthy of a crown. Even her grace, her measured words, her humble poise, were twisted into accusation. Some said she had bewitched the king with sorcery, that her mother Jacquetta's old magic had lured Edward into sin. Others claimed she had trapped him with cunning and charm. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. Elizabeth had shown that love could overrule the designs of kings, and for that, she was feared more than hated. In the weeks that followed, England's nobility watched with unease as the Woodvilles, Elizabeth's kin, rose swiftly in rank and fortune. Her father, Richard Woodville, now the Earl Rivers, took a seat among England's lords. Her brothers gained titles. Her sisters made marriages that bound them to the realm's most powerful houses. It was not only love that had changed the balance of the court. It was family. And the old nobility felt it like a wound. The age of mighty barons was ending. In its place rose a new kind of power. The power of blood ties, of quiet influence, of marriage and loyalty woven together like silk threads. To men like Warwick, this was heresy. To Elizabeth, it was survival. The Queen's every gesture was watched. Every glance she gave the king was dissected. When she smiled, the courtiers whispered of manipulation. When she spoke kindly, they murmured of strategy. At banquets, the great ladies of England refused to sit beside her. Some would lower their eyes when she entered. Others would rise and leave. Even the air around her felt colder, heavy with judgment. Yet Elizabeth did not flinch. She learned the delicate dance of survival, how to bow just enough to appease, how to smile without surrender, how to hold her dignity like armor. She would not bend, and she would not break. At last, the king himself stood before his council to silence the dissent. "This woman is my wife, my anointed queen, and none shall call her otherwise." The words carried across England. Warwick seethed, the nobles bristled, but Edward, young, fearless, proud, refused to yield. He reminded them that kings were not the tools of nobles. He had taken his throne by his own sword, not by their favor, and now he had taken his queen by his own heart. For all their outrage, the lords could not undo what was done. Elizabeth was crowned before the people, her beauty radiant beneath a canopy of gold. The crowds cheered, the bells rang, and for that fleeting hour, it seemed love had triumphed over politics. But beyond the pageantry, beneath the glittering surface of coronation, seeds of rebellion had been sown. Warwick withdrew from court, his pride wounded, his loyalty shaken. In his halls at Middleham, he began to plot. He would not forgive the slight, nor forget the woman who caused it. The Kingmaker who had raised a king now began to think of replacing him. And as storm clouds gathered over England once more, Elizabeth, the White Queen, stood unknowingly at the heart of a coming tempest. In the privacy of her chambers, Elizabeth sat in silence, her crown set aside, her gaze lost to the rain beyond her window. She had married for love, but now she ruled in isolation. Where once she had known tenderness, now came calculation. Where once she was cherished, now she was challenged. Yet in her stillness was a quiet resolve. She understood the cruelty of power, and that a woman in England's crown must wield grace like a sword. She would not yield to scorn, nor fade into the shadow of her husband's glory. From the ashes of outrage, she would build a dynasty. In the years to come, this moment, this marriage, would reshape the Wars of the Roses. It would turn allies into enemies, friends into traitors, and bind the kingdom's fate to a love story written in secrecy. The court's outrage had been loud, but Elizabeth's silence would prove louder still. For within her quiet endurance, England's future began to take form, and the echo of that defiance would ring through generations, long after the storm had passed. September 1464. The morning air over London shimmered with expectation. From the Thames to the Tower, banners fluttered, the white rose of York gleaming against the sky. In every street and square, men and women pressed shoulder to shoulder, craning to glimpse the woman whose name had set England ablaze. Elizabeth Woodville, daughter of a minor nobleman, widow of a fallen Lancastrian knight. Now, by the hand and heart of a king, she was to be crowned Queen of England. The procession began before dawn. Through the mists of Westminster she came, robed in white and silver, her train carried by noble ladies who had once mocked her name. Her veil shimmered like frost in the first light of morning, catching the glow of 1,000 candles. Beneath her feet, the mosaic floor of the abbey glittered as though scattered with stars. Each step she took was measured, steady, a march not of pride, but of destiny fulfilled. Outside, the crowd roared her name, their voices swelling like the tide. They had seen her walk among them once as a commoner. Now they watched her ascend into myth. When Elizabeth reached the high altar, the great candles flickered in the breath of the gathered multitude. The air smelled of frankincense, of wax and roses. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, his voice echoing through the stone. "By the grace of God, we anoint thee Queen of this realm." As the sacred oil marked her skin, Elizabeth bowed her head. In that moment, her past, the widow, the mother, the outcast, fell away like the last leaves of winter. She rose transformed, not merely a consort, but a sovereign presence, a symbol of divine favor amid a kingdom divided by blood. Her eyes opened. They glimmered not with fear, but with the calm of one who understands that power is both blessing and burden. The choir swelled, and golden light poured through the stained glass, painting her in color, red for love, white for purity, gold for destiny. Edward watched from his throne, his hand clenched upon the armrest. He had defied his lords, his council, and the mighty Earl of Warwick for this woman. And as he looked upon her, radiant beneath the crown, he knew the price would be high. Yet even a king could not command his heart otherwise. The crown itself was placed upon her head, a circlet of gold and enamel, its jewels shimmering like captured sunlight. The weight of it bent her neck for a moment, and in that subtle bow was an echo of humility and endurance. The crowd bowed as the trumpets sounded once more. The abbey shook with the chorus of celebration. Vivat Regina! Long live the Queen! But even amid the triumph, shadows lingered. At the edges of the hall, eyes turned cold. Whispers slithered like serpents among the courtiers. The witch's daughter, the king's folly, a crown stolen by beauty. The noble women curtsied, but their gazes burned with envy. The lords bent the knee, but their hearts festered with disdain. And beyond those gilded walls in the stormy north, Warwick, the Kingmaker, sat in silence, his fury ripening into treason. Elizabeth's coronation was more than ceremony. It was declaration, a challenge hurled against the order of the realm. A woman had risen not through alliance or heritage, but through the will of a king and the force of her own resolve. In her ascent, the great houses of England saw their pride wounded, and from that wound, rebellion would bleed. Yet within the abbey, Elizabeth stood unmoved, her face serene, her hands clasped upon her chest, her heart steady beneath the weight of the crown. She knew what it meant, the struggle to come, the venom of the court, the endless test of a queen made from neither ancient blood nor courtly lineage. Still, she would not bow. The widow of Grafton had become the White Queen of England. And though history would drape her name in legend and controversy, in that one moment, beneath the golden arches of Westminster, she was pure majesty incarnate. And so began the reign of Elizabeth Woodville, a woman both blessed and cursed by love, whose crown would glitter brightest upon the edge of ruin. From the roots of grief, she rose to a throne. From the ashes of war, she found love. And in defying the world, Elizabeth Woodville became both rose and thorn. A woman whose beauty changed a kingdom, and whose courage would soon be tested by every cruelty of fate. The year was 1465. London, still trembling from the chaos of civil war, was wrapped in the uneasy calm of victory. From the soaring spires of Westminster to the crowded markets of Cheapside, one name rose on every whispering tongue: Elizabeth Woodville, the new Queen of England. Her coronation had been nothing short of a miracle, a widow's ascension, born not of politics, but of love. And yet, in the candlelight of royal chambers, love had already begun to harden into power. Elizabeth was no foreign princess bearing treaties and armies. She was the daughter of a knight, Sir Richard Woodville, a man who had once fought for Lancaster, and of Jacquetta of Luxembourg, whose bloodline carried a trace of ancient nobility, but not enough to quiet the scorn of the great houses. The lords of England, had expected a queen from the courts of Europe, a bride who might bind kingdoms together through diplomacy. Instead, King Edward IV had married for beauty, for passion, for a woman who met him beneath an oak tree in the fields of Grafton. That single act, defying his advisors, his allies, even the great Earl of Warwick, had set the kingdom ablaze with rumor. "He is bewitched," they said. "The witch's daughter has cast her spell upon the king." But while courtiers whispered, Elizabeth began to rule. With every measured step, every graceful nod, every calculated kindness, she transformed her fragile position into unshakable authority. Through her, the House of Woodville bloomed. Her father was made Earl Rivers. Her brothers, Anthony, John, Lionel, were granted lands, offices, and the honor of knighthood. Her sisters were married into noble houses that once would have spurned them, in halls that had long been ruled by the ancient bloodlines of England, the Nevilles, the Percys, the Staffords. A new family now dined beneath painted ceilings and golden chandeliers. Their accent was softer, their manners less seasoned, yet their ambition burned bright. And for every step they took upward, a murmur of resentment followed behind. "The Queen's kin rise too fast," came the voices from the shadows. "The crown is not a gift for her family to devour." But Elizabeth had lived long enough to know that the favor of a king was fleeting. To survive at court, one needed roots, and she was determined to plant hers deep in the soil of England's nobility. Behind closed doors, Elizabeth transformed from woman to monarch. She learned the art of silence, how to let others speak, while she read the truth behind their smiles. She mastered the balance between charm and command, humility and majesty. Her beauty, that which had captivated Edward, became her armor. Every glance, every gesture carried purpose. When she walked into the council chamber, men bowed not only to the crown, but to the force of her presence. Even Edward, radiant in youth and vigor, seemed at times overshadowed by her quiet authority. He had chosen her for love, yet it was she who taught him the price of power. Beyond the palace gates, the kingdom watched uneasily. Nobles gritted their teeth as Woodvilles claimed titles once reserved for their kind. The people, weary from years of bloodshed, began to wonder if the peace they had been promised was already cracking. And in the north, in the halls of Middleham, the Earl of Warwick, the great Kingmaker himself, seethed. He who had placed Edward upon the throne now found himself shut out by the Queen and her kin. The flame of resentment that would one day ignite rebellion flickered quietly, waiting for the right wind. Beneath her beauty, beneath her grace, Elizabeth possessed a mind sharpened by hardship. She had been a widow, a mother, a survivor of war. She knew the fragility of fortune. Her charm concealed calculation. Her serenity masked strength. Each marriage she arranged, each title she secured, was not vanity. It was armor against a world that wished to unmake her. She smiled at her enemies, not because she trusted them, but because she intended to outlast them. In her chambers, beneath the watchful eyes of saints painted on the walls, Elizabeth prayed not for mercy, but for endurance. For she knew that to be a queen was to walk upon a blade, and only those with iron in their souls could survive the cut. As the bells of Westminster tolled, Elizabeth Woodville stood no longer as the widow of a fallen knight, but as the mother of princes, the matriarch of a rising dynasty, and the most powerful woman in England. The rose that had bloomed in Grafton now glistened with dew from the crown itself. And though many envied her beauty and despised her rise, none could deny her triumph. Yet even as she smiled beside her husband, in the glow of courtly splendor, shadows gathered at the edge of her reign. For in England, crowns were never secure, and love, even royal love, could not silence ambition forever. And so, as the banners of York fluttered over a divided realm, Elizabeth Woodville, the White Queen, began her reign not in peace, but in quiet defiance. In the great halls of Westminster, power no longer roared, it whispered. No clash of swords nor thunder of hooves echoed here, but the softer, deadlier music of silk sliding against silk, of secrets passing from tongue to ear beneath the shimmer of candlelight. Here, in this gilded labyrinth of etiquette and envy, Queen Elizabeth Woodville reigned not only as monarch, but as the master of performance. A woman who had learned that in court, survival was not about strength, but about grace, sharpened into a blade. The royal court of Edward IV glittered like a dream. Golden chandeliers cast warm light across frescoed ceilings, servants glided silently over mosaic floors, and the air shimmered with perfume and polished deceit. Ladies-in-waiting moved like chess pieces, each trained to smile, flatter, and conceal. Behind every courtesy lay calculation. Behind every bow, ambition. And at the heart of it all sat Elizabeth, the White Queen, poised and unflinching. To some, she was the embodiment of elegance. To others, the root of all corruption. Where once she had stood as Edward's beloved, she now stood as his equal, the arbiter of petitions, the dispenser of favors, the silent architect of alliances that would shape a dynasty. But beauty and intelligence were dangerous in equal measure, and the nobles, proud and restless, had not forgotten that she had come from nowhere. A widow who had dared to wed a king. For Elizabeth, every day at court was a performance. Her gowns were armor, woven with silver thread and defiance. Her crown, both halo and shackle. Every smile she offered was deliberate. Every silence, a weapon drawn unseen. She learned quickly that flattery was a language more potent than prayer, and that the sweetest courtesies could conceal the sharpest betrayals. In this world of masked intentions, Elizabeth's court became a reflection of herself, beautiful, refined, and perilous. The nobles of England came to her court adorned in jewels, but beneath the sparkle, their hearts beat to the rhythm of fear and envy. They curtsied low, their lips praising the queen. Even as their whispers dripped venom in the shadows, the witch's daughter, the Woodville enchantress, the commoner who sits on the throne of kings. Elizabeth understood one simple truth. Power, once gained, must be fed. And so she fed it with patronage, binding her allies with gifts, lands, and promises. Her brothers and sisters married into noble families, their fortunes rising with hers. Her father, the Earl Rivers, became one of the kingdom's most powerful men. Each Woodville placed like a stone in the foundation of her reign. But every favor came with a cost, and every advancement sharpened the blade of resentment. The lords of England began to grumble. The Queen's kin consume the crown. The old bloodlines are withering beneath the weight of these upstarts. And in their frustration, they found a common enemy in the woman who had dared to rewrite the laws of privilege. At times, even Edward himself grew weary of the endless quarrels between his nobles and his queen. He adored her. That much was certain. But Elizabeth had grown into something more formidable than the bride he once met beneath an oak tree. She was not merely a companion now. She was a strategist, a ruler in her own right. Together, they were a paradox. The warrior king and the calculating queen, two forces bound by passion and divided by politics. When Edward rode to war, it was Elizabeth who kept the court in balance, her letters guiding decisions, her hand steering the fragile vessel of royal favor. Yet love could not protect them from the jealousy it inspired. Every victory she achieved became another wound to the pride of men who believed that no woman, no commoner, should command such influence. It was at the banquets that Elizabeth's mastery was most evident. Seated beside the king, her gaze calm and knowing, she listened as nobles boasted of loyalty they did not feel. She watched their gestures, their half-hidden glances, the way they measured her with every sip of wine. And still she smiled. For Elizabeth understood that to show anger was to give it life. Instead, she offered grace, a grace that made her untouchable, that turned her enemies' hatred back upon themselves. In this court of silken daggers, every insult was wrapped in laughter, every alliance signed in shadow. Elizabeth moved through it all with the serenity of a saint and the precision of a general. She had learned long ago that survival was not won with swords, but with patience sharpened to a needle's edge. But beyond the jeweled halls and perfumed chambers, the kingdom itself began to tremble. England's peace, so carefully spun, was unraveling. The Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, whose pride had been wounded by the Queen's ascendancy, was gathering allies. In the north, banners of rebellion began to stir. Old loyalties fractured like ice in spring. Elizabeth, ever watchful, sensed the shift. Behind her calm facade, she began to prepare, not for the gossip of courtiers, but for the roar of war. For she knew what others did not, that the same charm which won a king could not save a crown. And so the court glittered on, a fragile paradise built atop jealousy and fear. Elizabeth sat upon her throne, the light of 100 candles shimmering in her eyes, the weight of an empire resting upon her calm, unmoving hands. To the world, she appeared invincible, a white rose blooming in a field of daggers. But even roses bleed when the thorns grow too close. And as laughter echoed through the marble halls of Westminster, the Queen of England, the commoner who had conquered the crown, waited for the storm she knew would one day come. In the far north of England, beyond the soft glitter of London's court and the laughter of feasts, the storm gathered. Within the grey heart of Middleham, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, stood before the roaring fire, his shadow flickering like a restless spectre upon the walls. He was no mere nobleman. He was the Kingmaker, the architect of thrones, the man who had raised kings and broken them with a single command. His will had once been the pulse of England itself. But now, that pulse beat elsewhere. The young King Edward IV, once Warwick's shining pupil, had drifted far from his orbit, drawn not by duty or diplomacy, but by love. Love for a widow of no great birth, no dowry, no foreign alliance, only beauty, charm, and the dangerous cunning of survival. Her name was Elizabeth Woodville, and to Warwick, she was the crack in the foundation he had built with his own hands. He had risked everything to place Edward upon that throne. Armies, fortunes, his own reputation. He had bled the Lancastrians dry, burned their banners, and silenced their claims. And for what? To see his carefully woven web of alliances torn apart by a marriage made in secrecy and emotion. "She has bewitched him," Warwick muttered, his voice low and bitter. "Through her beauty, she has ensnared the king's heart, and through him she will rule us all." He saw it as sorcery, not of the dark arts, but of influence. For what could bend a monarch's will faster than the whisper of a woman's counsel? What could unravel the ambitions of men more completely than a queen with her own family to advance? His hands, once used to direct armies, now crafted letters of warning, of outrage, of defiance. Messengers carried them through rain and mud, from castle to castle, until they reached every corner of England's nobility, each parchment sealed with the red wax of rebellion. The king forgets who made him what he is. The realm teeters under a woman's hand. The queen and her kin poison his mind and steal his throne in all but name. These were the whispers that now rode the wind. Warwick's fury became rumor, and rumor became rebellion. The Woodvilles multiplied at court like vines climbing the palace walls. Elizabeth's brothers and sisters, her uncles and cousins, all found themselves married into power, their fortunes rising like the tide. To Warwick, this was not politics. It was invasion. He watched, helpless as the old nobility, those who had fought beside him through years of civil war, were replaced by upstarts with soft hands and golden tongues. The court that had once trembled when Warwick spoke now turned its ear to the Queen's whisper. The Kingmaker, they began to murmur, is no longer the king's master. So Warwick began to plan again, not as Kingmaker, but as usurper. For when power slips from one's grasp, the mind that once built thrones begins to dream of pulling them down. He spoke with Clarence, Edward's brother, young, ambitious, envious. The seed of discontent found fertile soil in that restless heart. If Edward be led astray, Warwick said, then England must be set right by another prince more fit to rule. It was the language of treason dressed in the robes of loyalty. Letters became pacts, pacts became armies, and across the realm, banners once raised in Edward's honor began to rise against him. But beneath all the politics and blood, beneath the armored pride and royal oaths, the cause remained simpler and darker. It was not just about thrones. It was about humiliation. Warwick could forgive disobedience. He could forgive pride. But he could not forgive being replaced, not by a woman who had once stood by the roadside, begging for her son's inheritance. In the flicker of flame, his reflection danced across the steel, one half noble, one half shadow. If she rules through him, he whispered, then I will unmake what I have made. Outside, the thunder cracked like cannon fire, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to the breaking of a bond once thought unbreakable. And so, England's peace, brief and fragile, began to crumble once more. For when the Kingmaker's pride met the White Queen's resolve, the realm itself trembled between them. The roses would bloom red again, not in gardens, but in blood. In the stillness of night, while tempests shook the northern castles of rebellion, the Queen of England sat in her chamber, calm, deliberate, unyielding. Where men raised banners, she raised alliances. Where they sharpened swords, she sharpened silence. Elizabeth Woodville, once the widow of a fallen knight, now moved her pieces upon a grander board, the realm itself. Every word she wrote carried weight unseen. She dispatched letters by night, carried in secrecy through cloisters and abbey roads. Each one was a thread, and together she wove a web strong enough to bind kings. Her kin, the Woodvilles, became her instruments. Brothers, sisters, cousins saw all moved through England's noble houses like quiet flames under thatched roofs. To the untrained eye, it was ambition. To Elizabeth, it was survival. She knew that Warwick's fury was not only against her, but against the order she represented. The new world was not one where men alone held dominion. The Queen had claimed her share of destiny, and that sin was unforgivable. So she smiled when they whispered. She curtsied when they scorned, and behind every courteous gesture she listened. Faith became her armor. She was the image of devotion, England's white rose of piety, humility, and grace. Yet her prayers were not for mercy. They were for endurance. The clergy adored her, not only for her generosity, but for the sanctity she seemed to embody. They spoke of her as the queen anointed by Providence. And in a realm where divine favor meant legitimacy, that belief was her shield stronger than steel. Through feasts and dances, she worked her quiet sorcery, not of spells, but of alliances. Her sisters married into noble houses, Arundel, Buckingham, Essex. Her brothers rose in rank through loyalty and service. Her daughters, still children, were promised to princes not yet grown. Every marriage was a thread, every thread a bond. And the Queen's tapestry spread across England, woven with silk, sealed in blood. But not all saw her diplomacy as wisdom. Many whispered that she was greedy, that the Queen's family devoured every favor, every grant, every office the king bestowed. The old nobility, proud and bitter, saw themselves replaced by courtiers of lesser name but greater charm. To them, the Queen's grace was a mask. Behind it, ambition too great for a woman to bear. And so, admiration turned to envy. Envy turned to hatred. Elizabeth knew the cost of power better than any man at court. She had lost once, her first husband slain in battle, her family exiled, her lands taken. She had begged at the roadside for her son's inheritance. She would never beg again. Power, she had learned, must be taken, and once held, never surrendered. So she taught her children not to trust in crowns, but in cunning. Not in chivalry, but in silence. Even within the royal council, she placed her confidants. Clerks, scribes, stewards, men who owed their rise to her kindness, their loyalty to her gaze. When they spoke her words. When they signed her will. And so, Warwick's letters of rebellion met not open panic, but quiet containment. Information flowed to the Queen long before it reached the king. Edward, brave and golden, trusted his charm to hold his realm. Elizabeth trusted foresight. She watched the storms approach, not in fear but in calculation. For she understood what Warwick never could. The realm was not won by brute force alone. It was held by those who mastered appearances. Let the nobles call her ambitious. Let the rebels name her witch. As long as they looked at her, she had already won. When the sun rose, the Queen appeared in white, radiant, untouched by rumor or rebellion. The people bowed. The courtiers watched, and Warwick's fury found no echo within the gilded walls of London. For while he shouted treason in the north, Elizabeth wove destiny in the south. She ruled not with armies, but with grace, patience, and a will as cold as iron beneath silk. The Kingmaker had forged a crown, but the White Queen, she had learned how to wear it. Yet in the stillness that followed victory, she sensed it, the shift in the air, the tremor beneath the marble floor. The world she had crafted from whispers and devotion was too perfect to last. The storm had not passed. It had only changed direction. And soon, it would strike not at her throne, but at her blood. By the year 1469, the kingdom trembled on the edge of chaos once more. The peace Edward IV had forged through charm and conquest was cracking, like frost beneath the weight of a thaw. Whispers of rebellion spread from shire to shire. In market squares and churchyards, men spoke the name Warwick in hushed tones. The Kingmaker, once loyal servant, now a storm reborn. Once he had raised Edward to the throne. Now he would unmake him. and so the air thickened with treachery. Old allies turned their faces away. Letters vanished before reaching their destination. Rumors carried faster than truth, borne by fear across muddy roads and candlelit taverns. Within the grey halls of Westminster, Elizabeth waited. The Queen, once radiant in white silk, the jewel of Edward's reign, now stood as a sentinel of quiet endurance. Heavy with child, she moved through echoing corridors lined with portraits of kings who had fallen to ambition. She knew the pattern too well. Victory never lasted in England. Crowns were forged as easily as they were shattered. By day, she read her husband's letters, each one smudged by haste and rain. By night, she knelt before the altar, whispering prayers into the void. The chapel candles burned low, their wax melting like the hope that drained from her heart. Lord, keep my husband safe. Let my sons inherit peace, not ashes. Yet even as she prayed, thunder answered, a grim reminder that no prayer could silence war. Warwick, the mighty Earl of Warwick, the man who had once placed the crown upon Edward's brow, now turned against him. He had grown weary of the Queen's kin, the Woodvilles, whose rise to power had outshone his own. To Warwick, Elizabeth was not a consort. She was an interloper, a witch who had bewitched the king and stolen England from its lords. And so he crossed the lines of loyalty and blood, joining hands with his former enemy, Margaret of Anjou, the exiled Lancastrian queen. A pact sealed not by faith, but by vengeance. Together, they raised armies in the north, men who marched beneath the red rose, shouting for Henry VI's return. The white rose of York, once unchallenged, now trembled in the wind. From the palace walls, Elizabeth could see the omens, the skies darkening, the riders arriving with blood-stained cloaks and hollow eyes. Every sound became a warning, every silence a threat. At night, she would pace the royal nursery, her hand upon her swollen belly, listening to the storms beating against the glass. The world beyond those walls was unraveling, and her children, her unborn son, would inherit not peace, but peril. A single candle flickered beside her bed, casting the shape of the crown's shadow upon the wall, beautiful and cruel, the symbol of all she had gained and all she now stood to lose. In the shires, rebellion burst like fire through dry fields. Warwick's banners appeared on the horizon, white lions on scarlet cloth. Nobles who had once sworn fealty to Edward now opened their gates to the usurper's cause. Even blood could not bind ambition. The king rode to war again, leaving Elizabeth to guard the fragile peace within the capital. Each dawn brought new uncertainty. Would the next rider bring victory or ruin? Within the dim chambers of the palace, Elizabeth remained, surrounded by ladies who whispered comfort they did not feel. The corridors echoed with ghosts of her past triumphs, her coronation, her children's laughter, the music of courtly feasts now long silent. She sat by the window, watching lightning illuminate the distant skyline of London, the tower's silhouette black against the heavens. Every flash of light revealed her reflection in the glass, pale, steadfast, resolute. In that reflection, she no longer saw the girl who had charmed a king beneath an oak tree. She saw the queen who must now face destiny alone. News arrived, bitter and relentless. Warwick's armies had struck with fury. Noble houses divided, brothers turned upon brothers. England's fields burned anew. The crown she had once worn as a promise of love was now a beacon to every enemy of York. Still, she did not break. She gathered her children close, her faith unshaken. Her whispered prayers rose above the storm, carried into the dark like fragile light. If my sons must reign, let them reign in peace. If I must fall, let it be in faith. Outside, the heavens mirrored the turmoil below. Storm clouds rolled over London, their edges lit by lightning like the fire of divine judgment. It was as though the sky itself wept for England. And within that tempest stood the White Queen, proud, unbending, alone. Her silks clung to her in the damp air as she looked out from the battlements, the wind tugging at her veil. Beneath her, the city slept uneasily, unaware that before the year was out, its fate would hang upon her courage. For even as thunder broke and rain lashed the windows of Westminster, another storm gathered beyond her sight, one not of weather, but of vengeance. All her prayers, all her patience, could not turn aside what history had already begun to write. The crown she guarded so fiercely would soon drag her into peril deeper than she had ever known. The White Queen's greatest battle was not of love or beauty, but of endurance, survival, and the unyielding will to protect her blood. And so the storm gathered, above England, above the throne, and above the heart of a woman who refused to yield. For when kings fell and banners burned, one truth remained. The White Queen would stand until the storm broke her. England trembles, not from foreign invasion, nor the wrath of nature, but from the slow, silent breaking of loyalty itself. Across the green fields of England, banners once proud with royal symbols hang limp and uncertain in the wind. The people whisper in marketplaces, in taverns, in the smoky halls of power. Is the king still safe? Can the York crown endure? The kingdom that Edward IV had forged through blood and valor begins to crack, not with swords, but with pride. In the beginning, there had been unity. The Earl of Warwick, Richard Neville, the man the world would call the Kingmaker, was once the brightest star of the Yorkist cause. It was his influence, his silver tongue, and his gold that placed Edward upon the throne. It was Warwick who negotiated alliances, silenced rivals, and made the world believe in the glory of York. But power shared is power endangered. Edward IV, tall, handsome, and intoxicating in his confidence, began to rule not as Warwick's creation, but as his own man. The king grew bold, independent, and secretive, and in his defiance, Warwick saw betrayal. The chasm between them widened not through open war, but through silent insult, glances unreturned, letters unanswered, and ambitions unmet. Warwick dreamed of royal marriages and foreign alliances that would bind England's power to his own. Edward dreamed of love. Then came Elizabeth Woodville, a woman of neither royal blood nor vast fortune, yet possessed of a beauty so disarming and a will so unyielding that even a king could not resist. When Edward married her in secret, in the quiet of her family home at Grafton, the thunder that would shake England had already begun to rumble. No council was consulted, no noble was warned, no alliances were honored. A king had followed his heart, and in doing so, he shattered the heart of his kingdom. Warwick's rage was not merely that of a spurned adviser, it was the fury of a man who felt usurped by a woman of lesser birth. For every rise of Elizabeth's family, every title, every marriage, every whisper of Woodville influence, Warwick's pride bled a little more. In her he saw not only a queen, but a threat, a commoner who had conquered a king, a woman who had unbalanced the realm, a symbol of the unpredictable, unstoppable nature of power. The court began to fracture. Those who had once followed Warwick now turned their eyes toward the Queen's growing faction. The Woodvilles multiplied, brothers, sisters, cousins, each finding their place in England's noble hierarchy. The Kingmaker's voice was no longer the loudest in the throne room, his counsel no longer decisive, his plans dismissed. Pride, envy, and ambition gnawed at him. At banquets, Warwick sat in strained silence while the Queen's kin whispered and laughed at the royal table. At council, his words carried less weight than the soft-spoken suggestions of Elizabeth's brothers. And every gesture, every glance from Edward toward his radiant Queen was salt in his wound. By 1469, the man who had made kings began to dream of making and unmaking them again. Beyond the gilded halls of Westminster, Warwick began to weave his web anew. He whispered to discontented nobles, to soldiers unpaid, to the restless lords who saw in the Woodville rise their own decline. Rumors took root like weeds. The king is weak. The Queen rules through beauty, not wisdom. The York crown is tarnished by greed and vanity, and like all rumors in a time of uncertainty, they grew until even the loyal began to doubt. The Kingmaker's agents moved in shadows, carrying coded messages and sealed letters to faraway courts. Old enemies were courted, new friends bought. In smoky halls, men raised cups to rebellion. Then, in an act that would seal his fate, Warwick sailed for France. There, beneath the vaulted ceilings of Amboise, he met the one woman whose hatred of Edward surpassed even his own. Margaret of Anjou, the fiery and exiled queen of the Lancastrians. Their meeting was a scene of poetic vengeance. Once foes, now bound by a shared desire to destroy the Yorkist crown. Margaret, still burning with the loss of her husband's throne, saw in Warwick a weapon of revenge. Warwick, weary of being ignored and humiliated, saw in her the key to power reborn. They spoke by candlelight, their faces half in shadow. Outside, the Loire River flowed dark beneath the moon. Inside, two enemies clasped hands, sealing a pact that would plunge England into blood once more. From that alliance, an armada would rise. By early 1470, the ports of France echoed with the clamor of preparation. Carpenters hammered at the hulls of ships. Blacksmiths forged blades that glinted like stars in the torchlight. Monks blessed banners painted with the red rose of Lancaster. Warwick's men, hardened by exile and greed, swore oaths of vengeance. They were joined by the restless and the desperate, soldiers with nothing left but the promise of plunder. In the harbors, sails rose like dark wings against the gray sky. The sea, restless and cold, seemed to tremble with anticipation. Back in England, rumors spread like wildfire. The Kingmaker was coming home, and this time, he would not kneel. In the royal court, Elizabeth felt the change before the news reached her. She could sense it in the unease of her ladies, in the hurried pace of messengers, in the flicker of anxiety that crossed her husband's face during council. The name Warwick had become a curse, whispered with fear, spoken only behind closed doors. Edward, defiant and confident as ever, brushed aside her fears. "He is nothing without me," he said. But deep in his heart, even he knew that a man who made kings could also destroy them. The skies over England darkened. Rain fell in sheets. Crops failed. Superstitious whispers spread. The heavens themselves were mourning the peace that would soon die. In the distance, lightning flashed over the channel, and with each spark, the people imagined ships rising from the mist. Warwick's fleet approached, carrying the weight of vengeance, betrayal, and destiny. England was about to drown again in its own blood. The year is 1470, and England trembles once more beneath the weight of shifting crowns. The air itself seems to thrum with rebellion, like the heartbeat of a beast stirring after long slumber. Across the realm, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, has returned from exile, his sails black against the grey horizon. The man who once raised Edward IV to the throne now comes to tear him down. In the south, peasants whisper of armies marching through the mist. In the north, the banners of York flutter one day, only to fall the next beneath the red rose of Lancaster. And in London, that restless heart of England, fear moves faster than the Thames. At Westminster Palace, word spreads like wildfire. The king's advisors argue in hushed, desperate tones. Letters arrive sealed with broken wax, bearing grim tidings. Warwick's fleet has landed. Clarence, the king's own brother, has joined his cause. Edward's once mighty hold upon the realm unravels thread by thread. Nobles defect to Warwick's banner, each claiming loyalty to the stronger hand. Even among the city's merchants, men who once cheered the young king's charm, there is only silence now, and shuttered doors. The queen's household feels the tremor before it strikes. One by one, servants vanish. Guards abandon their posts. The palace, once radiant with laughter and the scent of roses, grows cold, hollow, and echoing, a monument already turning to ruin. And there, within her private chambers, Elizabeth Woodville waits. Once crowned beneath vaulted arches of splendor, she now stands before a cracked mirror, her reflection flickering in the candlelight. Her silken gown has been replaced with black wool, mourning attire for a reign not yet dead but dying by the hour. Outside her window, the bells of St. Paul's toll in the distance. Each peal strikes like a warning, reverberating through the empty corridors. Her ladies whisper prayers. Her daughters cling to her skirts. Her heart beats not for her own survival, but for that of her unborn child, the heir of a crown now slipping into shadow. Far off from the river, she can hear the murmur of crowds, Londoners shouting, boots striking cobblestone, and above it all, the deep, rolling thunder of rebellion. Across the countryside, King Edward IV rides north, his men scattered, his banners tattered by betrayal. He flees under cover of night, pursued by those who once called him brother and ally. He does not ride toward safety. He rides toward uncertainty, to the lands where loyalty is still measured in fear and coin. To Elizabeth, no word returns, only silence, the kind that grows heavy enough to drown hope. In her chambers, the queen kneels beside her children, her palms pressed together in prayer. She is not praying for victory. She prays for deliverance, not for a king, but for a mother. When dawn finally breaks, the decision is made. There is no court left, no army to defend her, no friend bold enough to shelter a fallen queen. Only one place in England remains sacred enough to offer protection: the sanctuary of Westminster Abbey. And so begins the flight of the White Queen. In the bitter chill of autumn, cloaked in black and veiled against recognition, Elizabeth gathers what little remains of her household. Her daughters walk beside her, small and silent. Her ladies carry what treasures they can hide: jewels sewn into hems, letters pressed between palms. The streets of London are no longer hers. As she passes through, windows close. Men bow not in loyalty, but in pity or in fear of being seen at all. The queen moves through the city like a ghost of her former glory, her crown replaced by sorrow, her majesty shadowed by the fear of capture. At last, the procession reaches the gates of Westminster Abbey. The bells toll again, this time not for war, but for refuge. The great oaken doors groan open, revealing the dark sanctuary within. Elizabeth hesitates at the threshold, the wind tugging at her cloak. Behind her lies the world of power, splendor, and betrayal. Before her, stone walls, flickering candles, and the uncertain mercy of God. She steps forward. Her children follow. The abbey doors close behind them with a heavy finality, sealing away not only their bodies, but the last light of her royal world. Inside, the air smells of incense and old wood. Monks move like shadows through the corridors, offering her silence instead of comfort. Within these walls, the Queen of England becomes a woman of exile, waiting, praying, enduring. Weeks pass. Outside, Warwick rules London in the name of Henry VI. Inside the abbey, Elizabeth gives birth to a son, Edward, Prince of Wales, born in sanctuary, beneath a borrowed roof and the shadow of her enemies. The child's first cries echo through the stone hall, mingling with the toll of the bells, a sound both holy and haunting. It is the cry of a dynasty reborn in hiding, the fragile voice of hope surviving in the darkest of winters. Within the sacred, time-worn walls of Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth Woodville becomes both prisoner and sovereign. A queen without a court, a mother without protection, a woman suspended between survival and despair. The abbey itself seems to breathe with her anxiety. Its stone columns, carved centuries ago, rise like sentinels of a forgotten age. Each arch echoes with whispered prayers and the rustle of robes. Candles gutter in the drafts that creep through the cracks of ancient windows. Their trembling light casts shadows on walls steeped in silence, yet pregnant with the murmurs of history. Elizabeth moves through these corridors like a ghost, her skirts brushing the cold stone floors. Her presence is both fragile and resolute, the contrast of her pale, delicate hands against the weight of destiny she carries. Outside, the London streets are alive with a hollow jubilation. The restoration of Henry VI, the old king, now seated upon the throne once more, his body frail, his mind wandering through a labyrinth of memories, his crown a burden heavier than any man can bear. But Elizabeth senses the truth that no crowd can see. This restoration is a fragile shadow, a brittle echo of order in a land teetering on chaos. From her high, barred window, Elizabeth glimpses the city beyond. Soldiers march through rain-slick streets, banners snapping like thunderclaps in the wind. Crowds cheer, but their faces are hollow, their joy tentative, as if every step on the cobblestones carries the risk of sudden death or betrayal. Food grows scarce. The once lavish markets of London, the bustling lanes she remembered as a bride, are subdued, shuttered, watched, tense. The smell of burning wood drifts from the hearths of distant homes, mingling with the pungent damp of river mist. Every breath she takes carries the memory of the court she has lost, the life she once commanded, the power she wielded with subtle grace and ambition. Even in sanctuary, the abbey is a city within a city, protective, yes, but oppressive. Monks glide silently past corridors lined with tapestries depicting saints and martyrs. Their faces are serene, yet their eyes reflect the ever-present fear of what might come through the great doors. Elizabeth walks among them, observing the ritual of prayer and sacrifice with a mind as sharp as a blade. Every footstep she takes resonates in the cold stone like the echo of a warning. Nothing here is permanent. Nothing is safe. and everything is observed. Elizabeth's daughters cling to her skirts. Their soft voices, whispers and lullabies ripple through the abbey like fragile threads attempting to stitch together calm. By candlelight, she brushes their hair, counting their tiny fingers, memorizing their faces, guarding their souls as fiercely as she once guarded her own throne. The queen is aware that every mother's instinct must now compete with the ruthless chessboard of politics. She cannot simply be a mother. She must be a strategist in exile, a silent player navigating a court of stone and shadow. Each day brings the news of the outside world. Movements of soldiers, whispers of Warwick's next strike, letters carried by unseen hands. Each word strikes her heart like a small arrow. Days blur into nights, and nights into prayers. Elizabeth walks alone in the abbey cloisters, the stones cold beneath her feet. Rain drums on the leaded windows with a sound like distant drums of war. She pauses often, touching the carved faces of saints, seeking solace in their frozen serenity. In these hours, her mind travels back to her earliest memories of court. The marriage to Edward, the rapid ascent of her family, the whispered envy of the nobles, the subtle power she wielded in her husband's presence. She remembers the brilliance of Edward's eyes, the warmth of his hand in hers, and the unspoken warnings in the courtly glances they shared. And yet now, in the cold, echoing corridors, she is forced to confront a harsher truth. Her power is gone, her allies scattered, her throne lost. But even amidst this desolation, life stirs again. The abbey's quiet halls are suddenly filled with a faint fluttering of anticipation. Elizabeth feels it in the shift of air, the movement of her daughters, the soft shuffle of nuns tending their prayers. A new dawn is breaking, not in the streets of London, not in the roar of crowds, but in the small, intimate miracle that life persists. She gives birth to a son within the abbey's walls, her labor aided by skilled midwives who move like shadows around her bed. The candlelight glints off the newborn's skin, and the air is heavy with incense and the metallic tang of birth. His first cries slice through the silence, a sound both fragile and defiant, echoing against stone walls and up into the arches, as if the abbey itself bears witness. Elizabeth holds him close, feeling the pulse of life against her chest. In that moment, all fear and despair are suspended. For though the kingdom may be torn, the dynasty survives in this infant, a fragile yet unyielding promise that the story of the White Queen is far from over. In the weeks that follow, Elizabeth moves with a cautious authority. She tends to her children, instructs her attendants, and negotiates with the clergy who watch over the abbey's sanctuary. Her eyes, once soft with youthful charm, are now hardened with the weight of exile and responsibility. She knows that survival is only the beginning. Every decision she makes now, how she raises her children, how she interacts with her watchers, how she endures the long, quiet days, is a step toward reclaiming what was taken, a preparation for a return no one outside these walls can yet imagine. Even in silence, even in confinement, Elizabeth Woodville is never powerless. The abbey may shelter her body, but it cannot contain her mind, her ambition, or her will. And so she waits, patient, vigilant, calculating, as the wheels of fate grind inexorably toward a future she alone begins to shape. Night falls heavy over London. The streets are slick with rain, glistening like veins of silver beneath the wavering glow of torches. Across the city, chimneys smoke and shutters close tight, for even the faithful whisper of omens and the wise do not walk abroad when the wind howls from the river. Within the sacred walls of Westminster Abbey, all is still, save for the murmurs of monks and the faint echo of footsteps along cold stone corridors. Here, beneath vaulted ceilings and ancient saints carved in stone, Queen Elizabeth Woodville waits in exile, her crown stripped, her husband hunted, her kingdom lost. Yet in her heart, something fierce and unbroken stirs. The chamber is dimly lit, the air thick with candle smoke and whispered prayer. Around her, a few loyal attendants move with hushed urgency. The abbey's midwives prepare linen, herbs, and warm water while the queen grips the bedpost, her knuckles white against the polished wood. She does not cry out. Every breath she draws is measured, defiant. For Elizabeth knows that even in sanctuary, the eyes of the world are upon her. She is a queen still, even when stripped of robes and jewels. Beyond the chamber, a monk chants softly in Latin, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of her pain. Each contraction becomes a drumbeat of endurance, each exhalation a declaration that she will not yield to despair. Hours pass like lifetimes. Rain drums upon the leaded windows, and thunder rolls across the river. The abbey itself seems to tremble, as though the ancient stones can feel the weight of history gathering within these walls. And then, at last, the silence shatters. A cry breaks the night, thin, sharp, and piercing, the cry of a child born in sanctuary, born in exile, but born royal all the same. The monks bow their heads. Attendants cross themselves, whispering, Deo gratias. The queen, pale and trembling, gathers the infant in her arms. He is small, impossibly small, wrapped in linen and the fragile promise of tomorrow. The flicker of the candlelight plays across his features, catching the faint shimmer of fair hair. To the world, he will be Prince Edward, heir to the House of York. To his mother, he is hope incarnate, the living proof that her line endures, even in the shadow of ruin. The midwife smiles, but Elizabeth does not. She knows too well the world into which he has been born, a kingdom poisoned by ambition, where crowns are bought with blood and loyalty turns like the tide. At dawn, the monks gather to bless the child. They chant beneath the great stone arches, voices echoing like ancient prophecy. Incense curls through the air, mingling with the scent of wax and damp stone. The priest sprinkles holy water upon the infant's brow. He names him Edward, as his father before him, invoking the strength of saints and kings long dead. Outside, bells toll faintly in the mist, a hollow, uncertain sound. As the ritual ends, Elizabeth remains seated, silent and still. She gazes down at her son, her tears falling softly upon his face. She whispers words no priest would dare record, words of vengeance, of endurance, of destiny yet to come. You will not be forgotten, she murmurs. You will not be lost to history. They may take your father's crown, but they will not take your blood. When morning comes, London stirs beneath a gray sky. The abbey stands quiet and solemn, its bells echoing over the Thames. Outside its gates, the banners of Lancaster rise again, red against the rain. Men shout the name of Henry VI, proclaiming his return to the throne. But within those walls of refuge, another proclamation has been made, one whispered, one unseen. For in the dim light of sanctuary, a new heir of York has drawn his first breath. He is born not into victory, but into defiance, not into peace, but into prophecy. And though Elizabeth sits alone in her chamber, cradling her child, she feels the pulse of destiny moving through her veins. The child's tiny hand grasps her finger, and in that touch lies the promise of restoration of vengeance, of legacy unbroken. The abbey bells toll once more, and as the sound rolls over the waking city, it carries with it a truth that none can yet see. That from the depths of sanctuary, a new star has risen, one that will outshine the storm. Winter gives way to a gray, uncertain spring. England lies restless, a kingdom without balance, its crown passed like a burden between ghosts. The red rose of Lancaster blooms again upon the banners of London, yet even its petals seem streaked with blood. And somewhere across the sea, in the chill winds of Flanders, a king without a throne dreams of return. Edward IV paces the stone halls of Bruges, his boots echoing in the emptiness. He is older now, leaner, the weight of betrayal pressing hard upon his broad shoulders. Around him gather the last of his loyal men, Gloucester, Hastings, and a handful of weathered knights who still call him Majesty. In flickering firelight, they whisper strategy and fate. Maps are spread across the table, rivers, fortresses, the old roads of England traced by trembling fingers. They speak of tides, of ships, of friends turned foes. And through it all, the king listens in silence. At last he speaks. England will have no peace till I stand once more within my own hall. Beyond the harbor walls, the sea roars in answer. It is an omen, the voice of destiny calling him home. Under cover of dawn, Edward's ships push off from the Flemish coast. The banners of York, frayed but defiant, unfurl against the gray horizon. Waves crash against the hull as gulls circle above, their cries lost to the wind. For days the fleet battles storms. Rain lashes the decks. Lightning cuts the sky into fragments of gold and shadow. Men pray, curse, and cling to ropes slick with salt and fear. But Edward stands firm at the prow, cloak whipping behind him, a man reborn through hardship. The storm is his trial, and survival his coronation. When at last the clouds break, the white cliffs of England rise through the mist, pale as ghosts, eternal as memory. He lands not as a conqueror, but as a fugitive king. His banner is small, his men few, yet his cause burns with something fierce and unyielding. Across the shires, news spreads like wildfire. Old loyalties awaken. Nobles who had once knelt to Warwick now look to the horizon and wonder, what if the Lion has returned? From York to Nottingham, doors open quietly in the night. Hidden armor is unburied. Coins change hands, oaths are whispered by candlelight. And as Edward marches south, his army grows, one heart at a time, one sword after another. Warwick, the man who made kings, now stands upon the edge of his own undoing. Once master of every crown, he has become its prisoner. His alliances crumble, his allies falter, and beneath the banners of Lancaster, he feels the tide turn cold. On Easter morn, 1471, the two forces meet at Barnet. A thick fog smothers the field, the world reduced to shadow and confusion. Arrows hiss unseen through the mist. Steel meets steel, and the cries of men echo like thunder in heaven's vault. Edward rides at the heart of battle, a blur of silver and scarlet, his war cry tearing through the haze. Lancaster's ranks buckle, confusion spreads, and as the fog lifts, the red banners fall. Warwick's horse lies broken. The Kingmaker himself is struck down, his armor crushed beneath the trampling tide of battle. The man who made kings is unmade in the mud of Barnet, his ambition silenced by the very storm he once commanded. Far away within the sanctuary walls, Elizabeth wakes to the sound of bells. For months she has heard them toll for sorrow, for exile, for danger, for death. But this morning, their tone is different. They ring clear and strong through the dawn mist, their rhythm alive with victory. The monks rush through the cloisters, their faces alight with word from the north. Warwick is dead. The Yorkist banner flies once more. Edward IV has reclaimed his crown. Elizabeth clutches her infant son, the prince born in exile, and for the first time, she allows herself to weep, not in fear, but in relief. The sound of bells mingles with her heartbeat. Every toll is a whisper from fate. The king returns. The queen endures. Edward rides into London at the head of his loyal host. The streets echo with the roar of a people weary of change yet hungry for stability. Banners unfurl from windows. Flowers rain down from balconies. The air smells of smoke and hope. Behind him, the golden light of afternoon catches on his armor, turning him almost mythic, a vision from prophecy rather than politics. In his eyes burns not triumph, but warning. He knows how swiftly fortune shifts. He has tasted both the crown and the dagger beneath it. He dismounts at the gates of Westminster. For a long moment, he stands before its stone facade, the same walls that sheltered his wife, the same walls where his son first drew breath. Then the doors open. Elizabeth steps forth, her child in her arms. Their eyes meet. Two souls bound by exile, faith, and fire. She bows, tears shining in her eyes, and whispers, "My lord, your throne awaits." Edward takes the child in his arms, lifting him high before the gathered court. The torches flare, the abbey bells thunder, and in that moment, beneath the vast arches of heaven, the House of York rises once again. Yet even as banners flutter and London rejoices, shadows gather once more. For in the north, Margaret of Anjou sails for England, and with her comes the last breath of Lancaster's fury. But that is for another dawn, another field, another tragedy. For now the queen can rest, the king can breathe, and the child, born in darkness, lies cradled in the sunlight of victory. The war is not over, but the crown has come home. The gates of London groan open beneath the weight of triumph. Edward IV rides at the head of his army, armor burnished by the afternoon sun, the white rose fluttering proudly above him. Behind him, the weary yet exultant faces of men who followed him through exile and storm, through the sea's rage and England's mud. Bells toll from every spire. Petals of white and crimson drift from windows high above the cheering crowds. London, battered and uncertain, exhales in relief. The king has returned. Through the smoke of victory and the clangor of bells, Westminster Abbey rises like a monument to endurance. Within its shadowed halls, the air still carries the whispers of prayer and fear. For this is where the Queen once hid, where hope flickered in the gloom of sanctuary. Now, as the great doors swing open, the sound is like thunder made holy. Elizabeth Woodville steps forth, no longer the hunted queen, no longer the wife of an exiled man, but a sovereign woman, radiant with dignity and sorrow. In her arms, she cradles the infant prince, the child born beneath sanctuary's shadow, now revealed beneath the daylight of victory. Her daughters walk beside her, their silken gowns brushing the ancient stones, their small faces luminous with the wonder of it all. The crowd erupts, a roar that rolls through the abbey square like a living tide. To the people, it seems as though heaven itself has opened. The white rose of York blooms again upon England's soil. But behind Elizabeth's calm, queenly composure lies the shadow of all she has endured. The sleepless nights within cold, damp walls. The prayers whispered over a newborn's cries, while war raged beyond the barred doors, the gnawing fear that her husband was lost, that all had been for nothing. Now that fear has turned to steel. She smiles, yes, but it is the smile of a woman who has seen how swiftly crowns tumble and how fragile love becomes when tested by power. The applause of the crowd is sweet, but fleeting. Even as she raises her son for all to see, the symbol of reborn royalty, she feels the chill of memory upon her skin. The crown is restored, yes, but its gold now glitters with the reflection of blood. As Edward kneels before the altar and the choir's hymn swells through the vaulted nave, Elizabeth closes her eyes. For a moment, she feels peace, the fragile kind that lives only in pauses between wars. She knows better than to trust it. In the sound of the bells, she hears not only triumph, but warning, for peace, like roses, withers quickly in the Garden of Kings. The sanctuary is silent now. The echoes of war, of marching boots and shattering hearts, have faded into memory. Yet within those stone walls where fear once nested, something new was born. Not only a prince, but a queen remade by suffering. Elizabeth Woodville had entered Westminster's sanctuary as a woman hunted. She had been stripped of title, of certainty, and almost of hope. The walls that enclosed her were both prison and protection. Each prayer whispered in darkness, a bargain with heaven. But when the doors opened again, and the daylight fell upon her face, she emerged transformed. Gone was the bright young bride who had once stood beneath the oak trees of Grafton, her hair caught by the wind as she vowed her heart to a king. In her place stood a woman tempered by exile, by loss, by the cold logic of survival. A woman who had seen the world for what it truly was, a chessboard painted with roses, red and white, where love was never enough to win the game. She would never again be the pawn. She would move as a queen must, obliquely, silently, with foresight sharpened by fear. The court she returned to was not the one she had left. The courtiers' smiles were practiced, their loyalties uncertain. The same men who had whispered her downfall now knelt before her again, pretending reverence while hiding daggers in their hearts. Elizabeth met their gazes one by one, her own expression unreadable, serene, almost saintly, yet laced with quiet defiance. She had learned that power does not only sit upon thrones. It hides behind veils, beneath silken words, within the calmness of those who refuse to break. At night, in the hush of her chamber, Elizabeth would sometimes rise from her bed to stand by the window. The Thames flowed below, dark, silver, eternal, carrying away the reflections of torchlight and crown. She would look upon the city she ruled from behind curtains of secrecy and prayer. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the echo of footsteps in the corridor, reminded her that peace is never more than a fragile illusion. In the cradle nearby, her infant son stirred, murmuring in his sleep. Elizabeth would draw close, brushing her fingers over his tiny hand. That hand, so small, so helpless, would one day bear the crown that had nearly cost her life. He was her future, her vengeance, her proof that even in ruin she had endured. The years ahead would test her again and again. Allies would turn to enemies. The line between loyalty and treachery would blur like mist over the Thames. But Elizabeth had learned her lesson. To endure, one must become more than human. One must become a symbol of patience, of silence, of cunning wrapped in grace. So she learned to smile in the face of deceit. She learned to hide her thoughts behind lowered lashes. She learned to wield affection as a weapon, to turn mercy into armor, and to let rumor be her shadow. The sanctuary had not only protected her, it had forged her. From the ashes of humiliation rose the White Queen, radiant yet untouchable, as if carved from moonlight and marble. Her beauty remained, but it was a weapon now, honed by pain and guarded by wisdom. In council chambers she spoke little, yet her silence was a blade that cut through the pretensions of men. She watched, she listened, and when she struck, it was with precision born of memory. Those who underestimated her soon found themselves swept aside by her quiet persistence, her ability to make the impossible seem ordained by destiny. To the world, she was once again the beloved queen beside her victorious husband. To herself, she was something else entirely, a survivor. A woman who had looked into the abyss of power and refused to be consumed by it. And though history would call her many things, witch, enchantress, queen of ambition, she knew the truth that history never records. She had endured when others had fallen because she understood what every ruler forgets, that crowns are not made of gold, but of scars. The child she bore in sanctuary would grow beneath her careful gaze, learning not only the language of kings, but the lessons written in her eyes. That mercy is dangerous, love is fleeting, and survival is the greatest throne of all. For the wars of the roses were far from over. England's roses would bloom and die again, watered by the blood of its sons and daughters. But the White Queen would stand among them, pale and resolute, the living embodiment of the truth she had earned in sanctuary's shadow. That those who learn to survive do not merely live, they shape the destiny of those who come after. The air in London is heavy with sound, the rumble of hooves, the thunder of cheers, the echo of bells rolling through the mist. Edward IV, the once exiled king, returns at the head of his victorious host. His armor gleams like molten silver beneath the sun. His banner, emblazoned with the white rose, flutters above him, a symbol reborn. London opens her gates to him as to a prodigal son. The people line the streets, their voices hoarse with jubilation, their faces smeared with ash and tears. To them, the long nightmare is over. The Lancastrians are scattered, their rebellion crushed. England, weary and wounded, believes it can breathe again. But among the roar of triumph, there are faces that do not smile. Widows in black watch from windows high above the street. Children clutch at their mothers' skirts, staring at the soldiers' bloodied armor. For though victory has returned the king to his throne, it has not washed the blood from England's soil. At Westminster, the bells toll again, not for death, but for deliverance. Within the cool shadow of the Abbey, Elizabeth Woodville waits. The memory of sanctuary still clings to her. The echo of prayer, the scent of candle smoke, the faint sound of her infant son's first cry within those hallowed walls. Now, the doors of the Abbey open once more. The Queen steps forth, radiant yet solemn, her white gown rippling like a banner of peace. In her arms, she carries her son, the child of exile, the prince born beneath the protection of the church. As she descends the steps, the crowd surges forward in awe. They cheer for her beauty, her grace, her endurance. The woman who has become both queen and symbol. But behind her serene smile lies exhaustion deeper than any crown can hide. She has endured what few could imagine, hunted, cornered, scorned, and yet unbroken. And as she walks beside her husband once again, she knows. Peace is only a word, fragile as a rose petal in the wind. The royal court, once scattered, gathers again within the halls of Westminster. The long tables gleam with silver, the courtiers glitter with jewels. Laughter fills the air, brittle, rehearsed, uncertain. Edward sits upon his throne, his confidence returned, his appetite for splendor undiminished. But beneath the feast, there is tension, invisible yet palpable. Old wounds linger, and vengeance has not been forgotten. The executions begin quietly, then swiftly. Those who once turned their coats to Warwick's cause are hunted down. Loyalty is demanded, not requested. Heads fall to the block in the courtyard of the tower. The sound of the axe striking wood echoes through the city like a heartbeat of warning. Elizabeth, though she says little, feels each death like a shiver in her bones. Among the condemned are men who once smiled in her presence, who toasted her as queen. Now their faces vanish into the dust, replaced by others just as ambitious, just as dangerous. She understands now. Victory in England does not mean peace. It means survival, one day longer than your enemies. Even in death, the Kingmaker's shadow lingers. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, once the mightiest man in England, lies buried beneath cold stone. But his ghost stalks the court. His alliances, his betrayals, his vision of power still haunt the corridors. Elizabeth feels his presence most of all. He was her undoing, her tormentor, the man who cast her into darkness and called her unworthy of a crown. And though she lives, though she reigns again, she can never forget that it was Warwick's hand that nearly erased her from history. Each time she walks through the halls of Westminster, she sees his ghost behind her, the smirk of arrogance, the whisper of upstart. Yet his empire lies in ruins now, and she, the woman he scorned, stands where he sought to place his own daughter. In the game of roses, she has outlived the Kingmaker. But Elizabeth knows what Warwick learned too late. Power does not die easily. It only changes its mask. Far to the west, another queen walks in chains. Margaret of Anjou, once fierce and proud, is led captive after the defeat at Tewkesbury. Her son, the last hope of Lancaster, lies dead upon the battlefield, his blood staining the soil that will soon be called peace. Elizabeth receives word of this with silence. She does not rejoice, for she knows what it means to lose a child, to live with the ache of fear every hour. Though they were enemies, she feels an unspoken bond with the fallen queen. Two women who loved too fiercely in a world built for men. Margaret will fade into exile and obscurity. Elizabeth will remain, her throne secure, her children growing, her influence expanding. But both will carry the same curse, to see how fleeting crowns truly are. The court of Edward IV becomes a place of magnificence unmatched in living memory. Gold and velvet, feasts and music, laughter echoing through painted halls. The king delights in pageantry, in tournaments and banquets, in the illusion that England is healed. But beneath the gilded veneer, cracks spread silently. Nobles bicker, old loyalties rot. Edward's indulgence becomes Elizabeth's burden. While the king drowns in pleasure, the queen sharpens her mind. She studies alliances, watches the shifting tides of favor, and learns to weave diplomacy where swords have failed. Her beauty remains legendary, but it is no longer her greatest weapon. Now her patience is. Every smile, every gesture is measured. Every silence hides calculation. When she sits beside Edward upon the throne, she seems serene. But in her heart, she counts enemies like stars. Night falls over Westminster. The revelry has ended. The torches dim. Elizabeth walks alone through the great hall, her footsteps echoing beneath the painted ceiling. The scent of wine and roses lingers in the air, reminders of victory and vanity alike. She pauses before the throne, gazing at its shadowed outline. This is the seat she fought to reclaim, the symbol of everything lost and won. But even as the crown rests secure, she feels its weight pressing upon her soul. She thinks of those who died for it, Warwick, Henry, young Prince Edward. She thinks of the widows who curse her name, of the soldiers buried beneath banners that once fluttered in glory. And she knows, every triumph leaves behind its ghosts. Her reign will glitter, yes, but the price will never stop being paid. The roses bloom white once more, but their roots drink from blood. Thus the White Queen returns, crowned again in beauty and sorrow. She has survived the storm, yet knows another will come. For in England, peace is only a pause, and every rose, no matter how pure, hides its thorns. Elizabeth Woodville stands beside her king, her gaze fixed upon the horizon, her heart both proud and wary. She has won back her throne, but she has also learned the cruelest truth of all, that triumph is never without tragedy, and that power, once touched, forever changes those who hold it. The sun no longer shines as brightly over Westminster. Once, the palace echoed with the laughter of nobles, the glimmer of gold, the hum of courtly songs. But time, like a patient thief, steals the joy from every chamber. Edward IV, once England's golden lion, grows pale, his breath shorter, his eyes heavy. He is not yet old, but his heart has carried too many feasts, too many battles, too many regrets. In the quiet of night, Elizabeth watches him. She remembers the young warrior who once rode into her village, who promised her love and defied a kingdom to make her his queen. Now that same man lies beneath silken sheets, struggling for air, his strength flickering like a dying candle. The courtiers whisper. The physicians speak of humors and prayers, but in their hearts, all know the truth. England's mighty king is dying. In his final days, Edward's chambers become dim sanctuaries of murmured prayer. Elizabeth refuses to leave his side. She feeds him with trembling hands, wipes the sweat from his brow, and whispers memories into the silence. Their wedding beneath the oak, the laughter of their children, the wars they endured together. Outside, the city still moves. Merchants shout, bells toll, the Thames flows indifferent. But within the palace, time has stopped. Elizabeth feels the air change, heavy with the weight of ending. The tapestries seem to breathe. The shadows cling to the walls like spirits watching. She prays not for herself, but for her children, for her sons, especially the young Prince Edward, who knows nothing yet of the crown's cruelty. Then, one morning, the bells toll not for prayer, but for death. The golden lion is gone. The White Queen is a widow once more. England mourns in black and crimson. Through streets shrouded in mist, the funeral procession winds toward St. George's Chapel at Windsor. Elizabeth rides in silence, her face veiled, her tears unseen. The people watch, some weeping, others whispering. The queen who once rose from obscurity now rides alone, her power uncertain, her fate in the hands of men who already circle the throne like vultures. Within the chapel, the coffin gleams beneath torchlight, carved with roses, adorned with gold, yet empty of the warmth that once ruled a nation. The White Queen kneels before her husband's tomb, her fingers tracing his name. "Rest now," she whispers, "for I shall not." In the wake of the king's death, England is a realm without balance. Edward V, barely 12 years old, is proclaimed king. His innocence becomes both his crown and his curse. Elizabeth, now Queen Mother, watches her eldest son ride toward London under the guardianship of her brother, Anthony Woodville. The boy's smile is proud, his bearing regal, a reflection of his father's youth. But already, danger moves in the shadows. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, Edward IV's brother, writes letters of loyalty, words dripping with honey, concealing ambition sharper than any blade. Elizabeth knows the signs. She has seen ambition clothed in piety before. She feels the chill that comes before betrayal. Richard arrives at court, draped in mourning black, his voice humble, his gestures saintly. He kneels before the young king, pledging to protect him as his father would have wished. But beneath that solemn vow lies calculation. The court is divided, half loyal to Elizabeth's family, half to Richard's cause. Soon, accusations rise. The Woodvilles are branded as greedy, corrupt, ambitious. Anthony Woodville, the young king's uncle and mentor, is arrested on the road. The child king himself is taken into Richard's custody for his own safety. Elizabeth's heart shatters, her son, her heir, her future, now a prisoner dressed as a prince. When word reaches her, Elizabeth flees to Westminster Abbey, her old refuge, the sacred ground where she once gave birth in fear. There, among the cold stones and flickering candles, she gathers her daughters and her youngest son, Richard of York. Outside, soldiers stand guard. Inside, a mother prays. The abbey becomes a tomb of living sorrow, a place where whispers replace sunlight, and each sound of hoofbeats beyond the walls might mean death or betrayal. Elizabeth writes letters to the council, pleading for mercy, for peace, for the safety of her sons. But power no longer listens to her voice. The months that follow are veiled in shadow. From the Tower of London come reports, first of coronation preparations, then of confinement, and finally, silence. The boy king and his brother are seen playing in the gardens one last time. Then, no more. No laughter from the battlements. No footsteps in the halls. Elizabeth's nightmares turn to prophecy. The roses she once nurtured have been plucked before their time. At Westminster, Elizabeth moves through her chambers like a spirit. The gold has lost its shine. The mirrors show only loss. Richard of Gloucester seizes the crown, claiming her sons were illegitimate. Ghosts declared unfit to rule. England bows to a new monarch, Richard III, and Elizabeth, once queen, once power incarnate, becomes a widow, a mother in mourning, a symbol of vanished glory. But in her silence, she endures. For the White Queen has known love, power, betrayal, and survival, and though her roses have fallen, their thorns remain. The camera fades to the empty throne room. Dust dances in the dim light filtering through tall windows. In the background, a child's laughter echoes faintly, a memory of what was lost. A single white rose lies upon the throne, its petals trembling in the breeze from an open door. The crown gleams, untouched, uncertain, beneath the gathering storm. The Tower of London rises like a fortress of silence and stone. Its walls, centuries old, have seen coronations, executions, and betrayals, yet none so haunting as what is about to unfold. Elizabeth Woodville's eldest sons, Edward and Richard, are led through the iron gates by men sworn to protect them. Their faces are bright with innocence, their laughter echoing lightly against the cold stone. but shadows follow them. Not only the long shadows cast by torchlight, but the darker shadows of ambition. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, has assumed the role of protector of the realm. His words are honeyed, his gestures pious, but his mind is sharp and ruthless. Elizabeth watches from a distance, heart pounding. The sanctuary that once held her infant prince during turbulent years now seems powerless. The gates close. The sound reverberates like a drum of doom, and she feels a chill that no candle can chase away. Inside the tower, the boys are treated with care, their chambers warm, their needs attended to. Courtiers speak of their health, of lessons and games, of preparing them for kingship. But Elizabeth knows better. Every quiet corridor, every locked door, every stern glance carries meaning. The tower has a long memory, and history whispers that walls do not merely protect, they imprison. The Queen's letters go unanswered. Her pleas to the council are met with vague reassurances. She senses the tide turning, the currents of power slipping from her grasp. As months pass, rumors begin to circulate. Some speak of Richard's ambition, others of secret plans whispered in the shadowed corners of court. Whispers claim that the boys are not merely under guard, they are under threat. No one says the words aloud, for fear is as contagious as the plague. Elizabeth listens from her chambers, sleepless, staring at the darkened windows of Westminster. Every horse-drawn carriage in the street, every clatter of armor feels like an omen. Her son's laughter haunts her memory, fading into silence. One morning, Edward and Richard are nowhere to be found. The tower is quiet, the chambers empty. Guards speak in hushed tones, their eyes avoiding the Queen's. Courtiers whisper about illness, relocation, and duty, but none can explain the absence. The White Queen's heart shatters. The children who were her hope, her legacy, her very life, have vanished behind walls that hold secrets stronger than any plea. Across England, fear spreads. Nobles murmur that the crown has claimed them before they could claim it themselves. Mothers clutch their sons. Fathers whisper prayers over their daughters. The court is divided. Some mourn openly. Others see opportunity in the absence of the young princes. Richard III consolidates power, presenting himself as the guardian of England, the savior of the realm. Elizabeth is powerless in public, but not in spirit. She maneuvers quietly, her letters and allies hidden like seeds beneath winter snow. Though her sons are gone, her mind is sharp, her influence subtle yet enduring. Even in despair, she demonstrates cunning. Each move, each word, each quiet negotiation is a reminder. The White Queen survives. Her dynasty may falter, her children may vanish, but her intellect and tenacity remain unbroken. The fate of Edward V and Richard of York becomes one of England's darkest mysteries. Scholars, chroniclers, and whispers alike speak of betrayal, murder, or political expediency. Elizabeth lives with the agony of unanswered questions. Every rose in her garden, every echo in her halls, becomes a reminder of lost innocence. Yet her story does not end in despair. She continues to navigate the treacherous currents of court life, her mind a fortress as strong as any stone wall. Through marriages, alliances, and quiet diplomacy, she ensures that the Woodville name will endure, even if her sons cannot. In the candlelit chambers of Westminster, Elizabeth reflects on the fragility of power and the cruelty of fate. She has loved fiercely, survived betrayals, and lost what was most precious. The roses bloom outside, white petals drifting in the wind, fragile yet resilient. Like them, she endures. The White Queen's legacy is not the crown her sons might have worn, but the cunning, courage, and resilience she wields in a world that would see her erased. Her dynasty may have faltered, her children may have vanished, but the Queen herself remains, a testament to survival, strategy, and the unyielding heart of a woman who would not be forgotten. The court has turned. The throne is occupied by men who mistrust her every move, and the kingdom whispers with uneasy rumors. Elizabeth Woodville, the White Queen, now older, wiser, and tempered by grief, resides in sanctuary. Her life a shadow of former grandeur, her children's fates uncertain. Yet Elizabeth's mind is far from idle. She knows the tides of power can be shifted, even from the margins. She watches England, calculating alliances, measuring loyalties, and plotting her family's future. Every letter she writes, every visitor she receives, becomes a thread in a web that may one day restore her bloodline to the throne. Across the rolling hills of the West Country, Margaret Beaufort, mother of the young Henry Tudor, navigates her own treacherous path. Margaret has endured imprisonment, exile, and the fragile favor of kings and courtiers. Her son, Henry, is York's and Lancaster's last hope, a symbol of new beginnings and dangerous potential. Elizabeth sees in Margaret an unexpected ally. The two women, once on opposite sides of the Rose's bloody war, meet in secret. In dimly lit chambers, candlelight flickers on determined faces as words are spoken softly, each one carrying the weight of history. A pact is forged. Elizabeth's daughter, Elizabeth of York, will marry Henry Tudor. Through this union, York and Lancaster may finally be reconciled, and England's fractured crown may be healed. Elizabeth knows this is no ordinary marriage. It is not love that will unite these houses, but necessity, strategy, and the relentless will of survival. She teaches her daughter patience, grace, and the careful measurement of every word. The young Elizabeth is trained in diplomacy, in observation, in the subtle art of influence. Meanwhile, Henry Tudor grows under Margaret's guidance, aware of his claim, yet shielded from danger until the time is right. The chessboard of England is being reset, and the pieces are moving silently. Elizabeth is both queen and strategist, mother and architect of a legacy still in the making. Yet even in plotting from sanctuary, danger never fully recedes. Richard III reigns with suspicion, wary of any movement that could threaten his crown. Rumors of rebellion, of plots, of betrayal, ripple through the court like poisonous wind. Elizabeth moves carefully. Each alliance is weighed, each correspondence coded. She knows that a single misstep could erase everything: her daughters, her influence, her last chance to restore her family's honor. Yet she acts with courage. The White Queen has endured exile, imprisonment, and grief. She will not be passive in her family's final stand. Finally, the moment comes. A formal agreement is made, solidifying the bond between York and Lancaster through the marriage of Elizabeth of York and Henry Tudor. The document is signed, seals pressed into wax, heralds whisper the news to allies and enemies alike. Elizabeth watches her daughter, imagining the future that might rise from blood and sacrifice. This union is the culmination of her lifetime of maneuvering, the last white rose standing against the thorns of history. Across the English Channel, Henry Tudor waits, poised for destiny. Elizabeth's efforts have planted the seeds for his claim. The path is perilous, but it is now inevitable. The marriage will bind the warring houses, unify the kingdom, and alter the course of history. Elizabeth, still in sanctuary, smiles quietly. She has survived wars, betrayals, and exile. Through her cunning and resilience, the White Queen ensures that the last white rose will bloom once more, not for herself, but for the England she loves and the family she preserves. Elizabeth Woodville will never see the full flowering of her plan, yet her influence endures. Her daughter will marry the man who becomes Henry VII, uniting York and Lancaster. England will finally have a king who carries both roses in his heart. The White Queen retreats into history, her triumph quiet but undeniable. Through strategy, courage, and indomitable will, she ensures that her line will continue. Though wars claimed her sons and treachery haunted her life, the final rose survives, a symbol of endurance, legacy, and the unyielding spirit of a queen who refused to be forgotten. The year is 1485. England has bled for decades, through battle, betrayal, and the burning fever of ambition. From Towton to Tewkesbury, from Bosworth Field to the shadowed halls of the Tower, the land has been soaked with the blood of roses, red and white alike. But now at last, the storm begins to quiet. On a field in Leicestershire, the last Plantagenet king, Richard III, lies fallen. The victor, Henry Tudor, raises the standard of unity over the corpses of division. For the first time in decades, England breathes. The long war that tore it apart, the Wars of the Roses, has ended. And in that peace stands the woman who began as a widow and became a queen, a mother, and finally, a legend, Elizabeth Woodville. Elizabeth watches as her daughter, Elizabeth of York, is crowned queen beside the new king, Henry VII. The sight is bittersweet. The White Queen, who once reigned over splendor and intrigue, now stands quietly at the edges of history, her life's work complete. She has seen her sons taken, her crown stripped, her family scattered. Yet she has triumphed in the one way that matters most. Her blood sits upon the throne. Her daughter's union with Henry Tudor seals the fragile peace between York and Lancaster. White and red roses entwine, and from their union blossoms a new emblem, the Tudor rose. Though no longer the shining figure of courtly pageantry, Elizabeth's influence endures. As Dowager Queen, she is both revered and feared, a silent reminder of what ambition can achieve and what it can destroy. At court, her presence commands respect, but her past evokes unease. The courtiers remember her rise, the commoner who dared to wed a king, the enchantress who defied nobility and altered destiny. Some whisper that she still holds secrets, others say she communes with ghosts. Elizabeth moves through these marble corridors with calm grace, her expression unreadable. Behind her, still gazed, lies the memory of every betrayal she has survived. In her later years, Elizabeth lives between two worlds, the living and the remembered. The laughter of her lost sons still echoes in her dreams. The scent of white roses fills her chambers with both comfort and pain. She walks through Windsor's gardens at dusk, her veil brushing the petals that symbolize both her triumph and her tragedy. She does not curse her fate. She has learned that destiny spares no one, not queens, not mothers, not even kings. Power fades, beauty withers, and crowns pass from hand to hand. But legacy endures. And her legacy, the dynasty born of her blood and cunning, will reshape England for generations. Yet peace does not last untroubled. Henry VII, ever cautious, looks upon his mother-in-law with wary eyes. Her family, the Woodvilles, had long wielded influence. Their name carries both admiration and distrust. Some say Elizabeth retreats by choice. Others whisper she is quietly exiled to Bermondsey Abbey, a nunnery by the Thames. There, the former queen spends her final years in quiet contemplation, her power reduced to memory, her voice to legend. But even in that isolation, she remains formidable, a presence that even kings hesitate to forget. In 1492, Elizabeth Woodville, the White Queen, dies. She is buried beside her beloved husband, Edward IV, in St. George's Chapel at Windsor. No grand processions accompany her, no thunder of drums. Her funeral is modest, but her story, her myth, already burns brighter than any crown. The commoner who became queen, the widow who defied a kingdom, the mother who birthed a dynasty, and the woman who, through tragedy and triumph alike, forged the bridge between medieval England and the dawn of the Tudor world. From her bloodline will come Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and the great Tudor dynasty that defines an age. Her children's children will rule a world transformed, a world of exploration, empire, and enlightenment. Yet beneath all that splendor, the echo of the White Queen remains, a reminder that even in a world ruled by men, a woman's will can shape history. Elizabeth Woodville's story ends not with defeat, but with transformation. The roses she tended, white and red, still bloom in the memory of England, and every Tudor crown that follows bears the silent mark of her enduring hand. Centuries later, visitors to Windsor Castle still whisper of a figure seen at twilight, pale, veiled, gliding through the rose gardens. Some say it is the spirit of Elizabeth Woodville, searching for her lost sons. Others say she guards the peace she fought so hard to create. But perhaps it is neither grief nor duty that binds her spirit. Perhaps it is legacy. For the White Queen is no longer merely flesh or memory. She has become what she always aspired to be, eternal. The rose that defied the thorns. The queen who became legend. The mother of the Tudors, and the ghost who will never fade from the soul of England.
Subscribe for more untold history.